"Ma'am, this area is for brief attendees only," the young lieutenant began. His hand shot up, palm out, a gesture better suited for stopping cars than speaking to a colleague. Lieutenant Commander Amelia Wilson showed no outward reaction. She simply completed pouring a coffee, her actions precise and unhurried. Inside the cold, windowless briefing room, a secure information zone. A soft drone filled the air from projectors and air conditioning. A few officers, Air Force colonels, Marine majors, Navy captains were settling into chairs around the huge mahogany table. Their hushed talks faded as they noticed the scene unfolding. Amelia set the small mug down. "I am an attendee, Lieutenant," she stated, her voice steady and quiet, entirely free of defiance. The young officer's jaw clenched. He was fresh-faced, his uniform pristine, with the overly keen stance of someone who knew every rule by heart but grasped nothing of their true meaning. His eyes skimmed her green flight suit, ignoring the rank on her collar or the golden wings above her left pocket, focusing instead on her face, her hair pulled back in a tidy bun. His eyes gleamed with the unwavering belief of a man who'd jumped to conclusions and was set on proving them right. "Spouses and support personnel aren't allowed in this briefing." He pushed forward, his voice a notch louder, putting on a show for the senior officers he believed were secretly cheering his strictness. "You'll need to wait outside, ma'am." He hadn't even bothered to ask her name. He simply saw a woman near the coffee pot, and his assumptions did the rest. Amelia finally turned completely to face him. She wasn't tall, yet she carried herself with a presence that made her seem firmly rooted. Her calm, bright blue eyes met his stare. "There must be some mistake," she said, still irritatingly polite. "The only mistake, ma'am, is your being here." He pointed towards the locked door. "Without the right clearance, you're putting this whole place at risk. Show me your ID now." This demand was purely about showing dominance, a move meant to embarrass her. Every person in that room had already passed strict security checks at the main entrance. This was a personal test, a public dare. Amelia simply reached into her flight suit's shoulder pocket and pulled out her common access card. She held it towards him. The lieutenant took it, his fingers brushing hers. His eyes quickly read the card, and for a split second, a hint of confusion crossed his face. It clearly showed LCDR Wilson. Right next to her photo, it plainly read, "Lieutenant Commander, OF." He was an O2, a lieutenant junior grade, outranked by 2 full pay grades. He should have stopped. He should have returned the card with a mumbled apology, his face red with embarrassment. But he didn't. Instead, the conviction in his gaze twisted into doubt. He held the card up to the light, as if searching for signs of a clever fake. "This could be a paperwork mistake," he mumbled, more to himself than to her. "Lots of records get mixed up when people transfer." He flipped the card, inspecting the magnetic strip and chip as if he held secret knowledge of how they worked. "Lieutenant," Amelia said, her voice dropping just a touch, "my card is valid." "We'll see about that," he shot back, his ego now fully invested in this terrible pact. He walked to a small security terminal near the entrance, a backup checkpoint rarely used unless there was a real threat. A Marine gunnery sergeant on guard watched the whole scene, his face showing nothing, but his eyes followed the young lieutenant with deep tiredness. He'd witnessed this situation many times. "I'll need to perform a complete check," the lieutenant announced to everyone, as if he'd found a huge security flaw. "We can't be too careful." He slid Amelia's card into the machine. The screen lit up, and he started typing, his movements much too sharp and noisy in the silent room. The other officers were now openly watching. An Air Force colonel, a woman with gray hair and an eagle on her shoulder, shook her head almost too slightly to note it. A Navy captain at the head of the table gave a soft cough, a quiet sign of displeasure. The mood in the room was rapidly getting worse. The lieutenant either didn't notice or simply didn't care. He was focused on his task, acting as a self-appointed protector of rule. "It says here you're naval aviation," he said, staring at the screen. He turned to her, a small knowing smile on his face. "Public affairs, I guess. Or maybe a weather forecaster. They give flight suits to a lot of support staff these days." The barb was sharp, meant to belittle her. He wasn't just doubting why she was there. He was challenging her entire career, erasing the true meaning of her uniform. He was telling everyone, including her, that even if she held rank, she couldn't possibly be an officer who truly counted. Not a pilot. Not one of the true flyers. Amelia's eyes briefly dropped to the golden wings stitched onto the green fabric of her flight suit. They were a little worn, the gold threads frayed at the edges from years of missions, from the constant friction of parachutes and survival gear. For a moment, the dull briefing room vanished. The soft buzz of the air conditioning turned into the thunder of two General Electric F414 engines at full power. The shiny mahogany table became a cockpit canopy, streaked with rain and ocean spray. She wasn't on a carpet, she was buckled into an ejection seat, feeling the controlled violent impact as her FA-18 Super Hornet smashed onto the deck of the USS George H.W. Bush, in the dark of a moonless night in the North Atlantic. That landing was a frightening dance of science and courage, snagging the third arresting wire at over 50 miles per hour. Slowing down so fast it felt like hitting a brick wall. Those wings weren't just for show, they were a badge of honor, a reminder, a promise forged in danger and skill, and the constant stomach-dropping fear she had learned to control. They were truly earned. "Something the matter, Commander?" the lieutenant asked, his voice oozing with fake worry. He had taken her brief quietness for a sign of weakness. Before she could reply, a man seated midway down the table leaned in. He was a Marine colonel, his face etched with years of sun and strain from a lifetime of duty. He'd been watching Amelia closely since the argument started, a hint of recognition in his gaze. He knew he'd seen her, but couldn't quite remember. Then his eyes fixed on the small round patch on her right shoulder, just beneath the American flag. It showed a skull in a knight's helmet, the emblem of Strike Fighter Squadron 54, the Black Knights. Suddenly it all made sense. A shiver ran down the colonel's spine. He recalled a dusty command tent in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. He remembered a frantic plea for air support. His unit was trapped by intense machine gun fire from a well-protected ridge. He remembered the calm, clear voice that came through the radio, the voice of the Super Hornet's pilot, who had swooped from the sun like an avenging spirit. "Gunslinger, this is Spectre 1. I see the target. Tell your men to stay low." He remembered the piercing shriek of the jet, the heavy, earth-shaking blast as the bombs struck the ridge with pinpoint accuracy, and then the welcome quiet. He looked at Amelia, truly seeing her, and he understood. This was no public relations officer. This was Spectre. The Marine colonel's hand moved quickly, almost hidden to the smartphone on the table. He covered the screen with his other hand, his thumb rapidly typing a message. It was a brief, pressing note sent to the only person he knew who could stop this growing mess from becoming a complete disaster. The message went to Rear Admiral Vance's assistant. The text was direct. "Sir, get the Admiral to the main briefing room. Now, the junior lieutenant is trying to kick out Spectre Wilson." The phone buzzed back almost at once. "Who?" The colonel typed again. "The Spectre. The one from the Kandahar rescue. Get him here." A few miles away, in the quiet wood-paneled office of the Commander Naval Air Force Atlantic, Rear Admiral Marcus Vance was looking over a supply report. His assistant, a sharp-looking young captain, entered, holding his phone like an urgent message. "Admiral," the assistant said, his voice strained. "You need to see this." Vance took the phone, his brow creased with annoyance at being interrupted. He read the messages from the Marine colonel. His eyes widened slightly at the name Spectre Wilson. It wasn't just a name he read. It was a name he recognized deep down, a name tied to important mission reports and awards for bravery. "Wilson," Vance stated, looking up at his aide. "Amelia Wilson is here." "Apparently so, sir," the aide confirmed. "And a junior lieutenant is causing a problem with protocol." Vance didn't need more details. He understood exactly what procedural issue implied when it involved a highly decorated female pilot and an overly eager young officer. He tossed the phone back to his aide and stood, his chair scratching on the wooden floor. He strode to his own computer, his fingers moving across the keyboard with a surprising speed for his age. He brought up Amelia Wilson's service history. The screen glowed, showing a career that sounded like it belonged on an advertisement for recruits. Distinguished Flying Cross, 8 air medals, over 3,000 hours in the air, 912 carrier landings, more than 200 of those in darkness. A Top Gun graduate, call sign Spectre, she led the mission that saved a SEAL team under attack near Kandahar. She was the squadron's weapons and tactics expert. Her last job was teaching new fighter pilots how to master the toughest conditions on the planet. Vance gazed at the screen for a long moment, a storm brewing in his eyes. He saw her official photo, the same calm, steady gaze he recalled from her last medal ceremony. He felt a rush of cold anger, quickly followed by a fierce, protective pride. "Get my hat," Vance told his aide, his voice a deep rumble, "and tell the Master Chief to join us." This was no longer just about correcting a junior officer. This was about protecting the reputation of one of his best people. Back in the briefing room, the lieutenant had reached the peak of his foolishness. He had logged off the computer, unable to find any fault with her ID, yet refusing to admit he was wrong. He marched back to Amelia, holding her access card between his thumb and finger as if it were dirty. "While your ID seems fine for getting onto base, Commander," he said, injecting as much mockery as he could into the title, "your clearance for this particular briefing isn't showing up. It's probably a paperwork error. You'll need to sort out with your own unit." He was making up rules as he spoke, digging himself deeper with every sentence. "So for the final time, I must ask you to leave. If you don't, I'll have security remove you. And we can also talk about falsely wearing aviation wings if you want to keep this going." The charge hung heavy in the air, harmful and unforgivable. Pretending to be an officer was a serious crime. Wrongfully wearing rank insignia was a deep insult, a blemish on a person's good name. The room became completely silent. The quiet whir of the machines seemed to vanish. Even Amelia's calm strength finally broke. It wasn't anger in her eyes, but a tired, deep sadness. She had flown through fierce storms, avoided enemy missiles, and landed on a moving ship in the darkest hours, all while in this uniform. And now, in a temperature-controlled room full of her colleagues, she was being told it was just a costume. It was at that exact moment the main doors to the briefing room swung open with a loud thud. Every officer in the room, no matter their rank or branch, instantly stood up. In the doorway stood Rear Admiral Vance, his 2-star flag shining on his collar. Beside him were his captain aide and the fleet master chief, a man whose chest was so covered in medals it resembled a living history book. They didn't just enter, they took over their combined presence changed the whole feel of the room. The young lieutenant froze, his mouth half open, Amelia's ID card still clutched in his hand. His face, which had shown nothing but proud certainty, fell apart into pure absolute terror. He looked like someone who had just realized the angry animal he was teasing was in fact an atomic submarine. Admiral Vance's eyes swept across the room, grasping the entire scene in one look. He saw the officers standing rigidly. He saw the scared lieutenant, and he saw Lieutenant Commander Amelia Wilson standing alone by the coffee area, looking more like she was facing an execution than attending a conference. Vance completely ignored the lieutenant. He walked past the young officer as if he were just an object, his gaze fixed on Amelia. The Master Chief followed, his face grim. Vance stopped right in front of her, the stars on his shoulders shining under the bright lights. The silence in the room was total, a heavy weight. He didn't salute, not yet. A slight knowing smile touched his lips. "Spectre," he said, his voice soft but reaching every part of the room. "I was wondering when you'd favor us with your company. It's been too long." Her call sign, her pilot name, her warrior self, echoed in the quiet. It was like a sudden crash of thunder. The young lieutenant recoiled as if the Marine colonel allowed himself a small, content nod. Several other officers, who had flown planes, exchanged glances of growing understanding. They knew that name. They knew the tales. Vance then turned to speak to the whole room, his voice becoming commanding. "For those of you who haven't had the honor," he started, his eyes scanning the gathered officers before finally landing like powerful beams on the frozen lieutenant. "Allow me to introduce Lieutenant Commander Amelia Wilson. She has performed over 900 landings on an aircraft carrier deck, which for you Air Force and Marine personnel is like trying to land a fighter jet on a tiny postage stamp during a hurricane in the dark." A soft laugh rippled through the room, easing the tension. She was the lead pilot for the attack that destroyed the enemy bunker in the Korangal Valley, a mission that saved. She was the pilot who, after a major engine failure and losing some of her controls, managed to bring her damaged Super Hornet back to the ship instead of bailing out, saving the Navy a $60 million aircraft. She did this with less than a quarter mile of visibility. The Distinguished Flying Cross she received for that incredible flying, in my view, was the very least she deserved. With every sentence the lieutenant seemed to shrink, his face losing all color. He wasn't just mistaken, he was terribly utterly wrong, and he was realizing it in front of the base's most important people. She has forgotten more about carrier flying and attack plans than most people will ever know. Vance finished, his voice booming with power. He turned back to Amelia, his stance changing from a leader to an officer greeting a highly valued equal. He raised his hand in a salute so sharp it seemed to cut through the air. "Welcome to the briefing, Commander," he said, his voice full of true admiration. "We need your specialized knowledge for the Iranian blockade plans." Amelia stood taller, the tiredness in her eyes replaced by a familiar spark. She returned his salute with equally perfect form, her actions sharp and confident. "Glad to be here, Admiral." The shift in authority was complete. Her public clearing was absolute. Vance then let his eyes rest on the lieutenant. The Admiral's voice dropped to a low, chilling quiet. "Lieutenant," he said, and the young man winced. "Report to my office at 3 p.m. with your commanding officer. You and I will have a thorough talk about understanding your surroundings, acting like a professional, and the Navy's main values of honor, courage, and dedication, which you appear to have forgotten." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm anger was much more frightening. He took the access card from the lieutenant's numb fingers and gave it back to Amelia. "Admiral," Amelia said, stepping forward a little. Her voice was steady, showing none of the upset she must have felt. With all due respect, the lieutenant was trying to follow security rules. His actions were mistaken, but the idea of being watchful is correct. Rules are rules for a good reason. She looked at the young man, not with anger, but with a quiet sense of disappointment. The rules just need to be applied fairly to everyone, every time, no matter what you think you see. It was a perfect example of dignity. She wasn't asking for sorry or revenge. She was reminding them that the system was bigger than anyone's pride, including her own. She was educating them as she spoke of principles, of applying rules without fail. Another memory sparked in her mind, even clearer and stronger than before. She was back in the cockpit, but this time, not landing, but taking off. The officer on the deck below gave the sign. The world became a hazy rush of controlled power. In under 2 seconds, her jet shot from 0 to 65 miles per hour. The intense G-forces pushed her hard into her seat, but her hands stayed firm on the controls. Her eyes checked the gauges, her mind already many steps ahead, focused on her task. That was the expectation. Perfect work, every single time, because lives relied on it. Those golden wings were not just about talent. They represented a solemn promise, a trust the young lieutenant had failed to grasp. The results came quickly, but not as most people thought. Lieutenant Peterson was not fired, but he was moved from his post and given a supply job, where his chances of shaming the Navy would be greatly reduced. Admiral Vance ordered a base-wide training on fairness and leadership, using a carefully changed version of the event as an example of hidden prejudice. He also started a new mentoring program, matching junior officers with experienced enlisted members and mid-career officers like Amelia, hoping to create understanding that rules alone couldn't achieve. A few weeks later, Amelia was at the base grocery store buying food after a long day training. She heard a hesitant voice behind her, "Commander Wilson." She turned to see Lieutenant Peterson. He wore regular clothes, and without his stiff uniform and rigid stance, he looked younger and smaller. His face was pale, and his eyes were glued to the floor. "Lieutenant," she acknowledged, her voice even. He finally looked up, and she saw true regret in his eyes. "Ma'am, Commander, I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry. There's no excuse for how I acted in the briefing room. It was not professional, it was rude, and completely improper. I was wrong." He spoke the words like a prayer, something he had rehearsed. "Thank you for what you told the Admiral. You didn't have to do that." Amelia looked at him for a moment. She saw his broken pride, but also a hint of something fresh. Humility. "We all make errors, Lieutenant," she said, her voice growing gentler. "What matters is what we do next. Learn from it. The next time you see a uniform, see the person wearing it, not what you expect them to be. See the rank they earned, the badges they fought for." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I will, ma'am. I promise. She offered a small, firm smile. Good. Now go buy your food, and Lieutenant. He looked up. Tuck your shirt in. A trace of the old Spectre flashed in her eyes. He glanced down, embarrassed to see his shirt untucked, and quickly tidied it. It was a small, simple adjustment, a seed of guidance planted in the strange ground of public shame. The story of Lieutenant Commander Spectre Wilson is a strong reminder that brave people come in many forms, and courage isn't always found flying a fighter jet. Sometimes it's found in the quiet strength of holding your position. If her story moved you, please like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe to Untold Valor Stories for more amazing tales, celebrating our uniformed women.